During the 6th century AD, long past the days of Augustus, the Roman Empire still stood strong. After the conquests of Justinian and Belisarius, almost all of the Mediterranean was brought once again under Roman rule. Nevertheless, it would take less than 50 years for all of these achievements to be reversed by a single usurper. Phokas. There has never been a man so corrupt sitting on the imperial throne. As soon as he became emperor, he focused solely on the destruction of his internal enemies, executing whoever dared to stand in his path. And it was not long until the empire's external foes noticed. Catching the Romans off guard, they attacked the headless state with no mercy. Justinian's once prosperous empire was slowly eroding under Phocas's administration, with Italy, the Balkans, and the East being under constant threat. The only thing certain was that the Romans were about to face an existential crisis, the likes of which they had never seen before. Meanwhile, on the eastern borders of the Roman world, an endless caravan moved across the land towards the magnificent city of Ctesiphon. This was the mighty capital of the Sassanian Empire. Descendants of the great Persians, the Sassanians had achieved to free their homeland after centuries of Greek and Parthian rule. Now, as masters of their own selves, they expanded their domains over all of the known East. Their leader, an ambitious young man named Khosrow, is determined to avenge the enemies of the Persians and bring all the world under the eternal flame of Ahura Mazda, and no Roman would stand in his path. But the northern frontiers of the empire are also in peril. A confederation of steppe peoples, led by the Avars, have established themselves across the Danube. Rumored to never unmount their horses, those people brought terror to the weak barbarians once leaving outside the Roman borders. Taking advantage of the power vacuum, they have enslaved all of the previous tribes. Their battle formations resemble a slave caravan, with Slavs and Goths acting as the numerous infantry, while the Avars themselves, clad in armor and skilled in archery, would initiate the fight and lead the huge crowd. Even if an unorganized opponent, it would take many Roman men and resources to contain the Avars. It would be during these troubled times that one of the greatest emperors of Eastern Rome would rise to glory, Heraclius. His father, the exarch of Carthage, would organize a swift expedition out of Africa so that Heraclius and his brothers would depose the corrupt Emperor Phokas. And so they sailed against the imperial forces both in Egypt and against the capital itself, Heraclius being the one to lead the daring expedition against Constantinople. But in Heraclius's good fortune, the empire's subjects had already had enough under Phocas's tyranny. Thus Heraclius managed to easily enter the city, with Phocas's people defecting to him en masse. It did not take long for him to enter into the palace of the tyrant. Once he spotted the now frightened Phocas, and knowing the destruction he had brought on to the empire, he asked, "Is this how you have ruled?" But it was Phocas's reply, who now knew it was time to pay for his deeds, that would haunt Heraclius forever. "And will you rule better?" Heraclius, driven by the fury of his youth, killed the tyrant on the spot. Once Phocas was dead, everyone in the capital greeted the regime change with hope, and thus, with the internal affairs settled, Heraclius set forth to deal with the external enemies. Two huge Sassanian forces were marching into Roman lands. led by two skilled Persian commanders, Shahin and Shahbaraz, the wild boar of Persia, as his name suggests, a warlike commander with great aspirations. Heraclius, gathering the underpaid and demoralized army of Phokas, hastily marched towards Antioch to intercept those mighty opponents in their attempt to capture the city. But despite his bold actions to this point, he had no real battlefield experience. His disheartened troops were no match for the Persian war machine who trampled the Romans. Within just 3 years into his reign, he stood defeated and disgraced, and the worst was yet to come. As the Roman army was now out of the picture, the Persians moved forward into the province of Syria, with Shahbaraz capturing Damascus and Antioch, the great Roman metropolis on the banks of the Orontes. The city's patriarch was slain and its population deported. Syria was engulfed in the flames of Ahura Mazda. But an even grimmer fate awaited Jerusalem. Shahbaraz managed to infiltrate the walled city with the help of the local Jews, but the brutality of the massacre that the Persians conducted was unimaginable, as described by an eyewitness. Anyone who ran away in terror they caught hold of, and if any cried out from fear, they roared at them with gnashing of teeth, and by breaking their teeth, forced them to close their mouths. They even slaughtered tender infants on the ground. And as if these were not enough, they captured and stole Christianity's most valuable relic, the true cross on which Jesus himself made his sacrifice. And as the Sassanians conquered the eastern provinces, the enemies from the west also decided to feast on the now weak Romans, the Avars. With the Roman forces destroyed and paralyzed, they seized the opportunity to establish themselves in most of the Balkan countryside. They raided and pillaged fields, villages, and small towns, even though their ambitions were not limited there, as they were openly challenging the walled city of Thessalonica, as their Slav vassals were used as meat shields against the city's mighty walls. Meanwhile, the Sassanids would become even more aggressive, emboldened by their victories. In 615, Shahin would advance deep into Anatolia, up to Chalcedon, directly opposite to the capital, bringing destruction to the heart of the empire. It now seems that God has forsaken the Romans, as the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse descended upon the empire. Conquest, war, famine, and death. Heraclius was now desperate. With no more realistic choices, he decided to send an embassy to Khosrow, offering the Roman Empire as a vassal to the King of Kings, a humiliating treaty. But the overconfident Khosrow was not willing to accept even this most generous proposal. The war would drag on. He wished to see the Romans completely annihilated. The response shocked the already desperate Heraclius. Maybe Phokas was right. Maybe Heraclius could not rule better. It was indeed under his own administration that the empire came at its lowest. But unknowingly to Khosrow, the refusal of this humiliating offer would plant the seed of his own undoing. Now the Romans, with their backs on the wall, had no other option than to fight back. Even if the most dreaded calamities had struck the Romans and had brought them to their knees, they also created conditions unique to the empire's long history. It was one of the rare occasions that an emperor, after enduring so many failures, faced no internal opposition. All of the Roman society, from peasants up to priests and generals, had come to the understanding that there would be no salvation unless they all stuck together into one and support the emperor, who, even though was unable to yet deliver any victories, was proven to be a man of honesty and valor. That is why no soldier complained when Heraclius cut their pay in half by providing their salaries with a devalued coin. The inscription on the new currency read, "God save the Romans." The soldiers knew there was simply no other choice. But before things could get any better, one last blow was to be dealt to the Roman state, which was already on its last legs. In 619, Sharbaraz's forces invaded the last province that still provided the empire with significant wealth and resources: Egypt. Now Heraclius could only count on two advantages that the empire still had left: the impregnable walls of her cities and the strength of the church. The religious institution of the empire not only exercised great influence upon the people, but also possessed immense amounts of wealth gathered through the centuries. Patriarch Sergius, seeing no other hope, liquidated a big part of the church's fortune in favor of the war effort. Thus the Romans gave their emperor one last chance. Everything now hung on a thread. The church treasures that Heraclius received were the empire's last funds, just enough to keep the state afloat and raise a standing army. But the emperor's next move would have to be one of planning and caution. So he vanished from public life for several months. It was said that a very specific book came into the emperor's possession, a book that the emperor studied day and night, a book that contained the knowledge of how the Romans should deal with their enemies, a war manual written by the great warrior Emperor Maurice, the Strategicon. The famous emperor had outlined 3 pieces of advice for fighting against the Persians: to fight them on level plains so that the Roman infantry can deploy their advanced tactics, fight them in the cold, and take advantage of their weak night camps. Those 3 pieces of advice would give Heraclius the edge on his encounters with the Sassanids. Heraclius emerged out of his solitude a changed man. Now more than ever, he was determined to put an end to the empire's humiliation, with a series of moves that would make or break the Roman state. But first, he needed a trained and loyal army. The emperor gathered the demoralized troops, who after more than a decade of continuous defeats, finally rejoiced by seeing the emperor within their ranks. Heraclius became one of them, enduring the same hardships and eating the same food. The emperor got accustomed himself in the ways of war and battle, and organized staged fights between his men. He taught them war signals, battle cries, and instructed them on all the military endeavors that he had studied. And with him, he carried a holy icon of the Mother of Christ, a relic said to have not been made by a human hand, as both he and his men knew that this war was no simple endeavor. The Sassanids had stolen the true cross. They had killed holy men and disgraced the empire's pious cities. This war would be a clash of faith, a crusade